You are listening to the e-flux podcast.
Hi, my name is Judah Rubin, here with Simone White. We're talking about her poetry at large and also her poem Or on Being the Other Woman, which is in e-flux issue 92, Feminisms. And by way of introduction, Simone is a poet, a scholar. Her most recent book is Dear Angel of Death from Ugly Duckling Press, came out in 2018. And she's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Yeah, so hi, Simone.
Hi, Judah.
I'm wondering if maybe we can start with if you want to read a section or maybe a couple of sections from the poem that's in, or the part of the poem that's in the journal.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Can I just choose?
Yeah. Totally up to you.
Okay. I'm going to read the third and fourth sections. How's that?
Sounds great to me.
Okay, because we were just talking about Kim Stanley Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
I like science fiction because something terrible is going to happen. Suppose it is the ocean, under this bowing, belching white, whatever you say, Mommy. Okay. Oceanic will come over all these very rich, their big boats, houses, and so on, will come over all this mess. See, reality, instead turn over tones of words ending in ul, that lose their significance and exactitude within seconds. A casualty of brain injury and exhaustion, both, is memory loss. You split open part of your head and for 6 months repeated words you had already said, but I didn't say anything out of delicacy or tenderness or timidity. I didn't say, why the fuck are you still working? What possible conditions could exist that require you to work without shelter while your brain swells? Who is your wife? Come home, the terrible thing. Du Bois teaches radicalization is possible. Adolescent boys living temporarily in my home, one like my own child, my brother's son. These words might have meaning for someone reading, like my own child. Regard it as an undifferentiated space in which to pile expensive junk reeking of petrochemical deodorizers. Losing track of devices, they need all these power sources and stations to connect. My need for certain kinds of privacy, tidiness, results in occasional inability to share personal space, surely related to believing that I'm pursued or overrun by half-eaten food, empty water glasses, bits of poop lining the rim of the toilet seat. At some point, cleaning a toilet, I'm like, is pee corrosive? Unmatched socks of others I must compulsorily clean up. In early life, among loud, not gentle, numerous family of origin, later, the men with whom I shared my homes, each deeply silent, somewhat still. I'm not revolted by evidence of the lived lives of other people. Effective means of housekeeping categorically interest me. The pleasures of a clean, orderly house. There are few absolute pleasures. As my life gradually became too busy to properly clean my own home, I paid another woman to clean. Patricia cleans my house now, even while I am away, working in another town. She watches so the boys don't harm anything they've not been warned not to harm. The fight with my mother about the boys' occupation. I negotiated a decent rate of pay and a tenure-track job at the University of Pennsylvania. More than one person in my family accused me of being angry and frustrated in the space of 1 week, but I feel saner and more fulfilled than ever. Height of my emotional power. For a week, I shared my bed with my son. We arranged for 5 days together in 2 cities, not New York, after many months, falling apart. My ex-husband made taunting sounds at me in my house in front of my child while I kept eating a piece of pizza and waited for him to leave. I received the first copies of my new book. Don't try to explain that I have changed. I don't feel much when people call me names or the functional equivalent. Miserable, delusional, immoral. I have things, a sense of things that belong to me that I have clung to, such as an apartment. Possessions, while they are not a mathematical index, can focus the instincts and point toward what must be sacrificed.
Thanks a lot for that. So in listening to this, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how the sort of serial sections of this poem work and how you see them fitting together as an overall piece, and so like how they form a totality, or how you're seeing them beginning to form sort of a continuum in this in this poem.
I mean, that's a good question. I guess I was, for like the last year or so, I've been thinking about the fact that so many poems in the present, poems I like Anna Majavakis's poems, I hear lots of people talk about their poems as being long, and it's never really been clear to me like what people mean when they say like I'm writing a book-length poem, or Stacy's poems, right? Stacy Smazik's poems. And I never thought of myself as a person who was like interested in sustaining long poems, because I'm sort of like a small, my energy is small for writing individual sections of poems. And I believe in like sustaining the energy of individual sections for as long as I can, and then it's done. I don't see any reason for a poem to be 50 pages. But I also was thinking about like the old, like people in the 50s who were talking about seriality. I was thinking about what Spicer says about seriality, or, how sequence works, and how what really sustains the connections between sections is more like I think I used the word like key at some point, like a kind of selection of related materials, rather than it's like how long can you work any given number of related pieces, and because the poem doesn't have any like external things that it points to. I keep saying this about this poem, that it doesn't have like a figurative internality, right, or something like that. It doesn't have any interest in like symbols per se, or like a symbolic universe. It's a conceptual universe that involves a certain number of words, and also humans, and also the things that it looks at section by section are like very, very specific emotional moments.
Yeah. So what are some of those emotional registers and moments, and how do they interact with one another, or intersect with one another maybe?
I don't know. I mean, I was thinking this morning, like on the way over here, I was thinking about this poem, and I said to somebody as I was trying to describe it, that what I discovered about this particular form, which doesn't seem, I would like to continue in it for a while, is that it is really flexible as a modality. Like you don't have to be in the same emotional position in order to compose these poems, is what I've found, because, the idea is to sort of like try to open up in words, like a specific emotional space, which I've maybe been thinking about for a long time. Like what is it to, in the last section, which you don't have in the journal, but I did read in the talk the other day, that space is a space of kind of like infra-feminine conflict, where, a group of people, a kind of social world, which is an important social world to me, kind of falls into disagreement as a result of, the pushing of someone into sort of like change or something. And I was trying to think of emotional situations which I didn't think had been fully explored in other places, that didn't seem exposed, that seemed underwritten in certain ways, and how I could bring those things forward. So I don't have like a list of emotional states that I want to, you know what I mean? It's like, what seems problematic, and what seems like something that might be usefully explored, because I don't think of these as like poems that are really all about me. Like I'm trying to add something to a conversation about what women's lives are like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is, to some extent, as you say, don't tell me that I've changed. But at the same time, I would say that there's not necessarily a shift in terms of the concerns that you have in your writing, but I do think in terms of the line and in terms of the form here. And you were talking the other night about how you want to make this sort of super, super long line, right? A line that almost doesn't have, that isn't enclosed in some way.
Right.
And, you use the word underwritten just now, which is also sort of an interesting word, right, in terms of what's guaranteeing, but also what is not there quite yet. And I'm wondering, in thinking about your line here, and sort of the visual, the way that the poem appears visually as opposed to orally, how are you coming into that? How are you thinking through that? And how does that relate to the reading of this when you do read it like you did now, or like you did the other night?
I mean, I'm just starting to read it. I've read a few times, I guess. It was really important that the poems spread across the entire space of the page that I was using, and and I'm sort of like learning more about what I want as I continue to write these or to work on this. I really want there to be like a lot of words on the page. I don't want to keep going back to the margin in an effort to like produce the appearance of verse. But but I don't think of them as speech either. I mean, I think I was much more interested in, previous projects in a kind of, verbal compression or friction that seems less important to me here. It seems more important to sort of scroll in a way. Mostly, because the sort of subtlety of being in one's own emotional life seems to me to be less deliberate than like what verse gives the impression of doing. I think, it's like I calculated a certain number of breaths that it would take me to get to the end of this line, and I want to be able to, perform those differences in like where to stop and how to, I actually don't want to do that. I want, and the long lines, I said this a little bit the other day, the reason there are like prose sentences here, and the reason that I wanted some of the lines to really look like long lines is that I did have a sense of like the content of those lines as being substantially different from the prose areas. Yeah.
So I'm interested in these, your use of capitalization, and is there a method to this capitalization throughout, or it's a
no, it's error. So it's in the early when I think I was thinking about how long it took me to start these poems after I finished the last poems in Dear Angel of Death. It was probably about a year. I had been working on prose stuff in the interim, but I didn't start writing new poems for about a year. I think that's about right. And I didn't, and I started like after I left New York, and I had like a month or two in Iowa. And I think maybe like on my first trip out of Iowa, I was sort of able to get into, I was like, oh, I could write a poem. Right? I don't know. I could write a poem. And so what I started writing, like on my phone. I like writing poems on my phone.
Yeah.
But I've started to enjoy it more, partly because of these like typographical curlicues.
And so you're not going back and saying to yourself, I'm going to revise this
No.
as a typo because it's part of the technical apparatus that you're
Yeah, it's
using.
part of the technical apparatus. And also I think it's really beautiful that the lines will break off. I do revise the lines, but I don't revise like in the second section of the poem. There's a thing that says like tolerable or something like that, and I just sometimes I'm kind of like, that's really pretty, like it just looks good, and I just leave it.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, it's sort of as representing, the kind of the sort of like great happenstance that can occur when anybody's writing poems, like the discovery of something satisfying. You know, anybody who writes poems is aware that this can happen.
Right. Yeah, because in a number of your earlier poems, something that I have always really admired is that there's sometimes you use these sort of like enjambed like hinge nouns where it's sort of like a Janus face noun that's looking in two directions at once. You do that in some places here, but I find that, and maybe it's also because of the way that you're using sentences here, obviously it's more prosy, but there is something about continuity that's very different. Maybe that seems to, I don't know, maybe has something to do with the way that things are being marked out chronologically or something. But I want to ask something different about maybe overloading. And when you were speaking on Friday night about trap music, specifically in terms of a production of desire, and you talk about this in the poem and in other writing. And I'm wondering about, you said that it's this sort of like overloading or overstuffing of desire into, into this musical space, right? In a world, I think you said something like where desire is not really allowed or is not certainly present. I'm wondering how does that find its way into your work, and if maybe you can sort of expand on what you mean by that.
This is a really, really big question.
Yes.
Which has a number of parts. So on the one hand, like I'm trying to find the space and the time to really do what I'd like to do with trap music, which is to kind of like write a significant treatment of it that I think it deserves. But and what I can say about it now in terms of like how I'm thinking about it is the things that I'm interested in terms of why I like this music are both related to something like kind of simple, which is that I feel a relationship to the music that is very much related to sort of my own gender identity, I think, which has to do with sort of availability of a certain kind of, I don't know, like, how do I talk about it? It's like a certain kind of identification with physical power and a kind of survival instinct and a kind of willingness to kind of do whatever one needs to do. Like when I was a little girl, my father used to say to me that like I was a really good soldier. You know what I mean? Like, and I think of it now in retrospect as a kind of like interesting kind of neutral gender address, where my father had two girls and a boy, and I was the oldest of the children. And it seems to me that in some ways, like my relationship to like what is possible in the world has a little bit to do with a sense that like I might have been raised like a boy a little bit, by which I mean like sort of like invited to perform certain kinds of Black masculinity. Like I had a really, really, really strong parent figure. And I feel like my own my interest in the music is partly in my sort of ongoing interest in the possibility of that kind of fluidity in gender identification, and the ways in which my response, physical response, and other responses to that music may actually be a kind of desiring response. Partly because, the voices are almost entirely male. I'm very, very interested in the ways in which heterosexuality continues to sort of like structure all my thinking. The ways in which it's a kind of reluctant heterosexuality, given, what I have experienced and know about, the problematic nature of choice, or whatever we want to call it, when it comes to desiring men from the perspective of womanhood. And I feel like trap music is a real fertile ground for Black people for thinking about how desire gets tossed around in the Blackness, and also the ways in which the consumption of Blackness is part of that matrix symbolically. Is so complicated, and so, it seems to me to be like infinitely complex. And also, I just really enjoy it.
Sure,
but
yeah.
the enjoyment, is like something that I'm continuing to sort of like explore, both in terms of like, a technological trigger for certain kinds of enjoyment, but also like the ways in which it like, causes me that supports me in a certain way in terms of thinking about, who I am, what I deserve, how to get it.
Mm-hmm. So maybe in the last couple of minutes that we have here, I wonder, sort of on that same note, whether we could maybe turn back to the poem for a second. And it would be great maybe to hear from that section starting these 5 tones. If that's...
You want to read that?
I don't. I don't
really want to read it.
Okay.
It's long.
Yeah.
I'm not. We could talk. What do you want me to say? Because the reason I'm like, I don't really want to read it right now is that, like, one of the things that I really am interested in about trying to have conversations about this music, especially like in the long continuum of like Black poets being interested in Black music and the various ways that it does, in a public way, kind of structure our permissions in the art world, right?
Yeah.
Is like, I am trying really hard to work out a kind of complex standing, right? As one is, both trajected, in the discourse of the music that is like verbal, but also the ways in which what I can take up as my own, right, unconsciously and otherwise, certain kinds of performances of gender or economic belonging, whatever we want to call it. And like, one of the things that I think is really interesting that nobody ever asked me about the Eileen Myles, which is like dead smack in the middle of the poem, right? It's like, why are you talking about Eileen Myles and also Juicy J in the same poem? And I don't, like, it's not like I'm like desperate to have conversations about what every poem said. I really am not. But I do think it's interesting that, like, there is a lack or we don't have enough conversation about, I think, this music. So great. I'm glad to talk about it.
Yeah.
But also, and to talk with people who are also interested in it. But also, I think it's really important that, like, I don't care to be an authority on trap music.
Right.
And I'm really interested. I'm really interested in it, and I think there's something important that it's offering me right now. One, in some ways, as a point of contrast, right? That the emotional cadence of that music is relatively gross. Doesn't have a lot of subtlety. although from person to person, you get pictures of people's emotional difference from each other. But, what I'm interested in is, in some ways, offering an alternative to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
As a vision of what other kinds of emotional, how are these two like emotional, I don't know, like profiles present in the same cultural package in a way? How can these things both exist inside Blackness and actually be talking to each other? How can one person be involved in the same conversation about these and respond and enjoy them both? Like, how can I, is the question, be, both able to kind of be like, yeah, I get a lot from Future.
Yeah.
I just do. His, everything about him interests me. And yet I don't know that I admire. I would not want to be in that position to have to do that.
Yeah. So maybe coming out of that, the question of how do those two things get performed at once, or how do they exist at the same time? How do they? I mean, that's.
I don't know. I mean, I'm a person who, let's wait 3 years until I can like really work it out. I'm super interested in, a conversation about the ways in which it is important for this music to demonstrate, the physical beauty that is possible for Black men. Like I'm super interested in jewelry. Like I'm really interested in the ways in which, like somebody like Race Fimmerd has the way they dress themselves is really interesting to me. The flowers and the, and I'm also a person who's, what can I say? Like, I don't care about cars, I don't care about any of that stuff. None of it. Nor am I a person who's like, I do not admire people who talk about, like, I don't think it's cute to talk about rape. That's not funny, And so the question is like, what, how can we live in this world which also imposes the requirement that we experience so much pain in our enjoyment of everything?
Yeah.
And so that's part of it. It's like there's like a lot of crushing stuff that goes on when one is listening to trap music. It's very humiliating, I think. And in some ways, I think I respond to the trigger to be humiliated as pleasure. And I'm curious about that, because so much of my actual life, the life that I live, is like there's a little, like people talk about words like microaggression and toxic masculinity seems so insufficient to me to really describe the emotional conditions under which Black women are forced to endure all kinds of small and large assaults and to bear the weight of other people's enjoyment and success, particularly their economic success. And and so that's part of it's like, how do they exist at the same time? Well, I don't know. You tell me, you know what I mean? Like they do and always have. Right. And so, I see this as a continuum. I see it as in exactly the same conversation as the conversation that Black women scholars have been having for decades now about the ways in which Black women have worked always, in support of, the existing regime of working us to death.
Well, There's a lot.
Like, how are these poems about that? I don't know. I'm trying.
Well, there's a lot. There are certain. We'll come back in 3 years and talk about it.
Exactly. Maybe it'll be clear.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, in any case, thank you so much.
Thanks,
It's
Judah.
been a pleasure talking to you as always, and thank you for this work, and and for this opportunity to talk.
Thanks so much.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
good to see you.
Yeah, always.